Hi, everyone. This is Acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology. It's Friday, January 24th, and today there is a new moon in the sign of Aquarius. So we're going to take a look at that new moon today. This is a unique new moon because it is in a close square to the planet Uranus. So we have a planetary combination that is toning the entire month to come. Let me give you a picture of it first. So here is the new moon forming in the early degrees of Aquarius. Here is the planet Uranus. And here is the square between the two, which is toning the entire lunar cycle to come. So that's what we're dealing with this month. And what does it mean? Well, first of all, one of the good ways of thinking about the planet Uranus is in terms of there's a few keywords that you can use: awakening, liberation, enlightenment, but often with a sudden, disruptive, or unexpected twist or turn that comes in. It's eccentric. It likes to think outside of the box. It defies traditional conventions, habits, behaviors, etc. So you're thinking about this kind of energy that can really flip the script and turn the plot on its head. It can also be something that leads to a greater sense of freedom and independence. The themes of needing to individuate, be one's self, to express oneself in defiant or rebellious manner. All of these themes can be really strong. And of course, at a new moon, we're saying that they can actually tone the entire month to come. So with that being said, there's a few other insights that I think might be helpful for us to think about today. And one of them involves a piece of broccoli. This is actually a kind of a famous piece of broccoli because of one of my students who has brought this piece of broccoli into class in order to help articulate her understanding of a concept that we've been working on in class. I thought that she did such a nice job with it. Her name's Delia, that I wanted to just give her a little shout out. So we're going to talk about the piece of broccoli that Delia brought into one of my private classes. Anyway, in the meantime, I want to read you something that comes from Liz Green about the planet Uranus. And this actually comes through a colleague of mine named Frank Clifford. Frank Clifford is a great astrologer, one of the editors of Mountain Astrologer, London School of Astrology, pretty famous guy in the UK when it comes to astrology. Anyway, here's what he says. He was quoting Liz Green, and it made me, and of course, Liz Green is one of our great sort of modern masters. And he quotes Liz Green saying this: "To ancient peoples, the beauty and vastness of the star-studded vault of heaven revealed the awesome power and intelligence of an invisible creator God. Uranus is an ancient and awesome portrayal of the divine mind that conceived the idea of a universe before any universe was made." Wow. She also describes Uranus's gift as the capacity to envisage the whole before it is manifest. So, in very simple terms, there is a sense in which a moon cycle toned by an opening square to Uranus can reveal to us a greater vision, a sense of the whole picture prior to it being manifest, which means that a new vision or a new sense of what's possible or a new complete blueprint for something that we want to do can appear to us this month. And it can be in small ways. It can be within a relationship. It could be in your parenting. It could be at work. It doesn't have to be some, massive life-changing vision, but it can be just a simple, small picture of the whole that you are becoming clear about, as well as maybe receiving the inspiration or the impetus to go and do something to start making that blueprint into turning it into a manifest result. So meaning making it real somehow, making it concrete, materializing it. Okay, so that is one thing that we can look for this month that can be really incredible. It's just a kind of a new picture that's emerging before us. For example, when a singer, songwriter, or artist suddenly receives the basic melody line of a song or the basic structure or idea of a book or something like that, or a plan or a strategy in business or something that you may need to do in terms of the organization of your budget or your home. So it can be very mundane, but in a sense, there'll be like, this this almost like a download, like I just downloaded a blueprint of something. And that's very Sun Uranus. Sun Uranus with the new moon conjoining is like a picture of a new beginning constellated around some defiant, original, new picture, epiphany idea. Might be a little defiant or rebellious, might take a little work to manifest, maybe in the very early envisioning stage as well. Okay, so I think that's probably one of the safest broad archetypal statements we could make about this new moon. The other thing you have to watch for on the shadow side is, of course, going to be the potential for some degree of arrogance or that kind of visionary hubris. I've got the best new idea. I don't care what anyone thinks. This idea is going to save the world. Or so when we get a little bit high on some new plan, vision, etc., and we're willing to just burn bridges or just kind of go nuts, we don't care what anyone else thinks to the point where we are reckless or defiant to a fault or something like that, we have to be careful of. And that can take place within ourselves, where we suddenly get this intensely rebellious streak that comes through and says, oh, just do it. Who cares? You know, and because we feel so compelled by some force or some sense of what needs to happen and so forth. Now, the other thing that I want to mention from Liz Green is that when she's referring to Uranus as the god who for whom, you know, creates the universe, and the universe exists within God's mind, you could say, as an idea before it is made manifest. And then even after it is unmanifest, remains in the mind of God as an idea, as a complete image or picture. That is it's deeply rooted in Greek philosophy, and we know, of course, that it has connections to other philosophical regions of the world at that time when astrology was being born. So, for example, you've heard me talk about Plato before. Let's talk briefly about the allegory of the cave. In the allegory of the cave, as most people know who's studied a little bit of astrology, I mentioned this book yesterday, by the way. If you're a newcomer, you don't like reading dense ancient Greek philosophy, but you feel like getting to know Plato a little bit, check out Plato for Beginners, kind of a cool book. If you do like reading the dense stuff I mentioned yesterday, I think it was John Cooper's edited anthology of Platonic works, which in turn I was referred to by Becca Tarnas. Really good one. I've liked reading it so far. Anyway, in the allegory of the cave, the prisoners are sitting there and they're looking at shadows on a wall. They've always been there. They've always been chained there. They're only seeing shadows on the wall. What is that in reference to? Well, that is in reference to our only being identified with our material body, thinking that that's all that I am is my material body. That's it. And then thinking that the objects of the senses and my sense experiences of pleasure, appetite, desire, hunger, privation, you know, disease, etc., on the physical level is all that is real. So insofar as we think that my physical existence and physical experiences are all that is real, I'm like a prisoner sitting and looking at the shadows on a wall. However, when I start to see more than just the shadows on the wall, then I start to perceive more of the totality of what is, of the total of reality. I start to see more of who I am, which means that I'm not just a body, I'm also an indwelling spirit soul, that the material world is not just matter, but there is inherent spirit, etc. When we start to see that, then we're like prisoners who get free from the chains and start understanding, oh, there's a fire that's been casting the shadows on the wall. That's its source. And then we go up out of the cave eventually and see the light of the sun in the real world. And that is Plato's spiritual journey, which he says is perpetuated by the desire to understand what is true, but more importantly, it is perpetuated by love, by seeking a higher form of pleasure or happiness than the fleeting kind of happiness that is inherent in only being a material body. So that's like Plato's allegory of the cave, right? This is where the piece of broccoli comes in. So I'm going to show you a picture of broccoli that, like I said, this student of mine brought into class that I thought was really, really fantastic. So, okay, here's a picture of broccoli. This is a beautiful, like fractaled piece of broccoli. So let's just use this as an example. Let's say that you are the prisoner in the cave. When you look at this broccoli, all you see is food to be eaten that may taste good, or, if you're like my daughter, you see it as food to be chucked on the floor because you don't like broccoli. So you're only seeing it in terms of like or dislike, hunger, or taste, and so forth. And that's it. Okay. That would be like you only seeing the shadows on the wall. But if you look closer and you're like, wow, look at these amazing fractal patterns. You can just see them. Where did they come from? Wow, they're beautiful. Why are they so beautiful? Now you're starting to live the life of a philosopher, because what we're starting to do is, in the ancient sense, the life of a mystic, because we're starting to look at reality and we're starting to see the indwelling spirit form, the indwelling intelligence, the indwelling unity behind all things, the indwelling essence. And something of this is good, beautiful, true. It draws us to it. And suddenly, although the broccoli is still there as an edible that we might really like, or as something that you feel like chucking on the floor, depending on you and your relationship to broccoli, you are now seeing it for something so much more than just broccoli. So your understanding of reality has become more inclusive and bigger simultaneously. You're not getting rid of the broccoli. You're not saying, oh, it's bad that I might want to eat broccoli or that I have a body or anything like that. But you are saying it actually turns out that my body and the broccoli, that there's so much more to it than just that physical level. Okay. So that's our cameo from broccoli. Now, what does this have to do with Uranus? Oftentimes, the thing that comes up with Uranus is we get this sudden new insight or epiphany. And that insight or epiphany naturally has this way of challenging the status quo, or making us, with great inspiration and enthusiasm, want to change or dismantle the status quo in favor of some new vision. Okay. So if you're like me, when I first started, really kind of getting into spiritual life, I just realized my candle isn't lit. I have 2 candles and one of them, there we go. So if you're like me, when I first started getting kind of really into spirituality, it was like, oh my God, I want to change my whole life. I want to change. There's so many things. And I'm thinking, for example, some of the first times that I experienced psychedelics, or the first time that I went to the Amazon back in 2003 and drank ayahuasca. So there's this sense of needing to recreate everything. And that's natural when Uranus comes and liberates us from a limited scope of understanding. Suddenly, boom, the picture is so much bigger. We're understanding that thought in the mind of God, which is, again, what Uranus is related to. Uranus has this sense of being the creator God, of which the universe is then a reflection of an idea in that creator God's head. So Uranus is this complex philosophical meaning. Because Uranus almost always has to do with perceiving more than a limited understanding of something, seeing a bigger picture, and then wanting to almost instantly instantiate that, make it real, translate it into some kind of tangible change in the material sense. And here's where the problem lies. Because most of us, when we encounter something new, we then immediately pit it against what we consider to be something old. So, for example, when you have a bit of a spiritual awakening, you go, oh my God, what was I doing? Right? What was I thinking? I can't believe I was kind of living in some degree of ignorance about something. You could have that awakening on the level of your health. You could have it in terms of a relationship or a job, or something you've been doing in your parenting, and suddenly you wake up and go, what have I been doing? So the new insight or revelation, because it appears quote unquote new, almost necessarily in the way that we perceive reality, will be then pitted somewhat unconsciously against what is old. And the problem with this is that actually what we're perceiving is not new versus old. In that sense, awakening is not a linear thing. It's not a linear thing where you master old lessons, get rid of old ignorance, and come into the truth. It's actually a way of unfolding and starting to understand more of the total truth of what is, at which point the thing that you used to do or used to think is still there. It's just that you're seeing things for more than what they were. There are some ways in which in other words, the person sitting in the cave in Plato's allegory of the cave, seeing the shadows on the wall, those shadows are real. It's not like they're completely unreal. It just turns out there's more to them than we understand. But in our kind of modern tendency towards being sort of obsessed with progress, we think those evil shadows, the light is real and the shadows are bad. And what Uranus is actually implying is understanding that the shadows are real and there's something more than the shadows. There's a fire casting them. So similarly with the broccoli, you don't suddenly look at the broccoli in the fractal form and go like, oh, I used to think this was food. Now I understand it's artwork, right? Right? It's actually what we're talking about is, in a way, we're saying, oh, it's not just food. It's also this beautiful divine artwork. But that doesn't mean it loses its function as food either. Do you see what I'm saying? So when we have Uranian awakenings, it's very important to think very compassionately and very inclusively, not just in this sort of defiant rebel, I'll burn all the bridges, get rid of everything that doesn't reflect this new awakening, this better status. When we start using new and better and progress with Uranus, we tend to get into polarization with what we experience as old, outdated in the past. And what we're really trying to see is that's why the broccoli example was so good and was so helpful in the class that I just taught, because like I said, we're not saying anything about broccoli's existence. On one level, broccoli is a piece of food, and you like it or you don't like it, or you like that. It doesn't take away that level of its existence to realize that, wow, look at these beautiful fractals inherent in this form. So similarly, be careful this month that the new vision you received is not pitted against the past, where there is the sense of needing to, like so many stories of revolution in our world, the revolutionary new idea that seems so liberating, so much more enlightened, and so forth, easily becomes the new face of tyranny. And one of the reasons that that happens is because the way we birth things matters in the karmic world. And if we move into a greater, more comprehensive vision without inclusivity of the past, or without inclusivity of the quote unquote old, without some understanding of its essence, its relevance, its beauty, its sanctification, its belongingness, then what we're going to do is eventually we will become the face of a new old thing that has to be updated and thrown out. And this is why Uranus and Saturn and Jupiter back to back to back tell this very deep psychological tale about one ruler usurping another, usurping another, usurping another, like that. This is not just because the Greeks were some unintelligent, outdated patriarchs. There's questions about patriarchy that are really relevant in the world right now. But these are deep archetypal and mythological truths about humanity, which is that we tend to think in terms of, well, here's the old and now the new is going to be so much better. And then eventually that new becomes the old, and then like this. This is being consumed by the idea of progress. And when we're consumed by the idea of progress, what we're basically doing is only tweaking our involvement in material things slightly. Real spiritual awakening, in other words, is not really about progress. It's about coming to see more than we're currently seeing, but that seeing more is always inclusive of everything else that we saw before. So that inclusivity is so important for Uranus. Be careful that when you're crafting the next chapter in your life, that it is not damning of something that came before. Try to understand how the new vision can be inclusive of what came before. Another case in point, in most political theory classes, what you'll find is, day one, the professor will, draw a circle on the board and say, politically speaking, we have views that go over to the right and then over to the left. And then there's something, kind of in the middle. And the farther you go to the left in the circle, and the farther you go to the right, the more you end up meeting, the two ends end up meeting. So the same thing is basically true from the ancient astrological perspective about spiritual growth. If our spiritual growth is always being pitted against something in the past, we're in extreme polarization territory. And insofar as we do that, that extreme polarization will end up always meeting in the middle, so that the new thing becomes weirdly like the old thing eventually. And this is a problem, for example, in political history. If we study history carefully, this is part of the reality of politics in our world. It doesn't have to be that way, but that's part of the way that history tends to repeat itself. So with Uranus, we always have to be careful, because the new isn't really new. It's, in a sense, always been there. It's just that we're learning to see it. And when we learn to see it, if we can be gentle shepherds of the development of the new, we're going to get a lot farther than if we become reckless, defiant, impulsive, impatient, and damning of the thing that came before. So that was what I wanted to share today. I hope that this makes sense and was useful for you, and that you are now thinking about broccoli a little bit differently. And I know that if I tried to tell my daughter about the inherent fractals of broccoli, she would only probably take the broccoli and smash it in my face. So anyway, I hope you guys have a great weekend and a great new moon in Aquarius today. Take care, everyone. Bye.